Okay, so for the next book, what I plan to do is make a full cloth, single signature, case-bound pamphlet. Same style, same steps, but I'm going to adjust the size, I'm going to add an inset on the cover, and I'm going to make it the full cloth as I mentioned. So the first step is, as it was before, to go ahead and figure out the dimensions of the book. So for this book, I'm going to be working with these sheets of paper, which are about 18 inches by 6 inches. Yes, 18 by 6. I cut my paper down a lot so that I can be working with the exact size that I want. However, occasionally I'll get lucky and find something cool like this pad of charcoal paper, and it's the 6 inches by 18 inches. And so I'm just going to work with it at its normal size. And when you're not really setting out for a very specific goal, it can sometimes be kind of fun to play around with that and see what different sizes of paper will get you. So I'm going to start by folding my text block. I'm going to take my paper, jog it up, and crease it really well. So let's just confirm our dimensions. We started with 18 by 6, so we ought to be right around 9 by 6 at this point. So just to confirm, looks like a little bit more like 9 1/8 because of the creep. We've talked about that in class, where the paper pushes out a little bit when you fold it, and it is obviously still 6 inches tall. So for my book boards, what I'm going to want to do is go about 9 1/8. So same width as my text block, this time accommodating for that creep, and 1/4 inch taller, so 6 1/4 inches. So what I'm going to go ahead and do now is cut and prep all of my materials, my cloth, my boards, my spine wrapper, and my end pages. So again, I've confirmed that my grain in the paper does run short, so my grain runs this way. I've already figured that out for this piece of board. I want my grain in the board to run the same as the grain in my paper. So I'm going to do my height of 6 1/4 going this way. Again, just patient, repeated scoring, not pressing too hard, just letting it take its time. I can feel the difference now in my blade. It has definitely gotten duller since when I started, but I think I can still keep using it for a while. It may just take me a couple extra score marks. Okay, and I'm going to need another piece of that same width. So I've got two pieces that are 6 1/4 inches high, but I need to make them 9 1/8 inch wide. And I'm using my grid, as I always do. One thing you may notice as you work on your book board is that it's easier to cut with the grain than against the grain. You can feel the difference for sure. Okay, so I have two cover boards. Let's just check them to make sure that they worked out right. So yep, we're about this exact same width as the text block and just a little bit taller, which is perfect. Now we're going to go ahead and cut the cloth and all the end sheets. So I'm going to start by cutting down my book cloth. Again, I want my grain to run in the same direction as my cover, so I'm going to test that real quick. It's really floppy that way, but let's just double check. Oh yeah, it's definitely running along in this piece. Again, I make my pencil marks to help myself remember that. And then I'm going to go ahead and flip it over and make the cut. It can be really tricky sometimes to work with pieces of cloth that are this big, so it's not always a bad idea to go ahead and maybe just use your scissors to make a rough cut so that you'll get something that's a little bit more manageable when you're ready to trim with your X-Acto knife. So that's much easier to work with. Now I will have to go ahead and make some straight edges because I definitely have 3 edges on here that are pretty far off from being straight. So I'm going to just do a little bit of trimming. Trim about 1/2 inch here. Get myself a nice straight square edge. I'm going to do the same thing over on this side. Fortunately now I've got this straight edge I can line up. And here I'm going to have to trim off a little more, like 1 inch almost at one end. Although down here it's really close to about 1/4 inch. Okay, great. So now what I'm going to go ahead and do is trim this to the width that I want. Now, for a full cover, if you just pause for a second and get your boards back out, if you lay those across and really allow for your spine gap, that's what you want for your dimensions. So in this case, if my boards are 9 1/8 each, that's going to be 18 1/4 inches plus 1/2 inch for my spine gap. So I'm going to go ahead and round that up to 19 inches of actual space taken up by the boards in the spine gap. Of course, I also then want my overhang on either side of the board so that I can make sure that I have plenty of space to do my turn-ins. This sheet that I happen to have here is actually really close, so I may not trim it down much further. I think I might trim off about 1 inch or so. And then I'm going to trim it this way to make it a little bit narrower. So if we were working with about a 19-inch space plus 2, that's going to take us to about 21 inches. And then well, remember it was 6 1/4 inches tall, so I want to add about 2 inches to that. I may go ahead and just make mine 9 inches tall. That'll give me plenty of overhang, and I'm not too concerned at this point about conserving a big piece of this cloth because I've already cut it down so much. Okay, so this is the piece of cloth I'll work with to make this full book. I'm not going to cut it any more than this. It's really big. I'm going to set it to the side, and now I'm going to go ahead and cut the in pages. You'll remember that for this book, I said that I wanted to do an inset on the cover, and I actually chose this image that I'll inset from an old book I have. I found it at the book thing. It's Birds at Home, and it's just a bunch of great illustrations of birds, and I'm sort of slowly using up pieces of it. I decided after I chose my inset from the book that I would go ahead and actually use its original in pages for my in pages. They're just about the perfect size. So, as you recall, you want your in pages to be the exact same height and width as your text block. So in this case, I'm going to want them to be 6 inches, and this is actually exactly 12. So I'm just going to cut it in half. And then I'm going to want them to be about 9 inches wide. I'm actually going to cut them at once. I stack them and jog them up. And then I'm going to go ahead and trim off this torn edge that I have from where I took it out of the book. I also need to cut myself a spine wrapper for my text block. This piece is already about 1.5 inches wide, so I think that's going to be just about perfect. I'm just going to trim it a little bit and make sure that that width is even. And I'm going to go ahead and make it the same height as my text block. So we'll start there. One of the great things about book arts is that you really can make use of your offcuts or the pieces that you would have sort of considered scraps. And that looks pretty even, so I'm actually going to leave that alone. I don't think I need to trim it anymore. Just a little bit less than 1.5 inches. So to recap, just go back over all these pieces. I have my text block and my spine wrapper. I have my in pages and my inset that complements them. I have my 2 book boards, and I have my full cloth for the cover. So now I'm ready to go ahead and sew my text block. I'm going to do this the same as I did before. I'm going to use the 3 pamphlet stitch. Start by folding my spine wrapper in half. Make sure that it's ready to go. Set that to the side. Mark where I would like to put my sewing stations. Again, a little bit in from each end. I'm doing 1 inch in from each end, and then I'm going to split the difference. And then I will punch those with my awl. I will also go ahead and then put my spine wrapper on so I can punch the holes through that. I am going to go ahead and put the cloth side down. Remember, the paper side is the side you want out because that's the side you're going to glue into your book. So again, just using those original sewing stations as a guide to punch the cloth. I'm going to go ahead and get myself a piece of thread to work with. I'm going to want that to be about 3 times the height of my book. Again, as I said, it's probably a little more than I really need, but it'll just make sure I don't run out of material to work with. And again, I'm using the unwaxed thread for this, so I am going to go ahead and wax it. This is that hemp. I actually found this set at Artisan Craftsman Supply here in Baltimore, in Station North. Love these spring colors, are making me very happy today. So I got my thread waxed. I'm going to go ahead and sew my text block. Thread my needle. I leave a little bit of overhang, but I don't tie any knots in it. And then I get my text block. And I'm going to start at the middle, sewing from the outside in, again remembering that whichever direction I start from is where my knot will show up. So if I start from the inside, my knot's in here. If I start from the outside, my knot will wind up on the outside of the book and get covered up when I case it in. So that's what I'm going to do. Then I'm going to go ahead and leave a little bit of a tail hanging out on the outside. I don't want to pull it through while I'm sewing by accident. Next, I'm going to step over to this topmost sewing station. Pull that through, get my tension, check that, make sure it's all set. And now I'm going to skip the middle. We'll remember that from the last book. I'm going to go down to the sewing station. I haven't sewed through it all yet. Coming out on the inside. And then I'm going to finish up by sewing back through the middle and coming out on the outside. Going to check my tension. Just make sure that I'm not leaving any unexpected loops anywhere. Make it nice and tight. And I'm going to go ahead and just tie that off in a double knot. And trim the tail so it's about 1/2 inch or so. Now before I make the book, I do want to go ahead and press it, especially this one. You may notice how it's really bowing open here, and I don't want that to happen. So I'm definitely going to put this in the press for a little while before I can case it in.